Thanks for tuning in to watch The Ordinary Filmmaker once again. Before I get into today's big epic news, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Now by liking and subscribing, well, subscribing to this channel and liking this video or even disliking this video, what you're doing is you're providing feedback, you're interacting, and that feeds into YouTube's algorithm, and it really does help grow the channel. All right, and now to today's epic news, and actually it's not really epic at all. If we look at the development announcement from Nikon and the rumors just before that, they line up quite well, and the leaked information that we got yesterday, the leaked specifications, they're not epic in any way whatsoever based on what we had before. I would say they confirm things a little bit. They provide us with a bit more what I consider third-tier information, nothing groundbreaking. And if it had been groundbreaking, I would have released this video yesterday when this information came out. And the reason I didn't release it because I thought, well, it isn't that big of a deal. But everybody's calling it epic. So maybe if you're a Nikon user, you can tell me why this information is epic. But from the point of view of what Sony's released in the Alpha 1, or even what Canon released last year in the R5, I don't see the Z9 specs that were leaked yesterday to be epic in any way. I mean, they do provide some validation to previous rumors. So let's get right into the information. Now, we do know that the Nikon Z9 is going to do 8K video, and we know that because Nikon's told us that in the development announcement. We're going to get 24, 25, and 30 frames per second, and those are basic, they're considered basic frame rates. But we also get a few more slow motion modes. We get 120 frames per second, we get 60 frames per second, but we do have to drop down to 4K to get those modes. What I'm curious about, will Nikon give us 8K oversampled 4K? There's no reason why they can't. I would be surprised, in fact, if they didn't give us an 8K oversampled 4K like Canon did with the R5, which costs some $2,600 less, and that's assuming that the price of this camera is going to be between $6,000 and $7,000, and I'm willing to bet, dollars to donuts, that the Z9 is going to cost $6,500. Now Nikon could really surprise us and come in at $59.99, but I don't think they're going to, and I don't think they need to. So here's what's going on right now. We've got a huge shortage of semiconductors. It's affecting supply chains worldwide. And there's going to be a lot of demand for this camera. Now let's look at all the people that are still using the F mount. They're going to look at this and say, you know what? I think Nikon's come out with a really solid professional level camera. It does 8K video. It's got high megapixels. Wow, this is great. I mean, this is Nikon's answer to the R5 in many ways, and superior in many others, such as 30 frames per second. So this looks like a solid camera, and likely it's not going to have the same overheating issues that the R5 does, simply because it's got a larger body, which gives Nikon the ability to, well, architect a proper thermal architecture. And if they architect things right, this camera shouldn't overheat in any way whatsoever at normal room temperature. We'll just have to wait and see how that goes. Now going back to the 8K, 4K video modes as well as FHD or 1080, let's take a look at slow motion. Now in 4K we will get 60 frames per second. Now for some people that's the rate they shoot at, so you're only going to get 2 times slow motion if you go up to 120 frames per second. But if you're shooting with the basic frame rates that I mentioned, 24, 25, and 30, well then you're going to have up to 4 times or even 5 times slow motion. And that's pretty significant. But the rumor yesterday introduced something else. It said 160 frames per second. Now I do have a problem with this, and here's why. Generally when it comes to slow motion, it goes up in increments of 30, so you would have 120 frames per second, 150, 180, or it goes in multiples of 2, so you can go 120, 180, 240, 480, 960, and 1080. These are common slow motion rates that you will see in video cameras or video camcorders. But with stills hybrid cameras, generally we don't see much more than 120. So I would expect it to be 150, not 160. That leads me to believe that this information is suspect. But if it does exceed 120 frames per second, I believe it's going to be limited to 1080, which isn't so bad. A lot of content we produce today is still outputted in 1080 or watched in 1080. But there's a big but here. I hope Nikon is listening. I hope they've copied Sony and not Canon here, and they've given us, at the very least, 4K downsample 1080 or 8K downsample 1080, giving us a much sharper, much more detailed 1080. Sony does it. Sadly, Canon doesn't, so your 1080 is usually quite soft. But I think it's more possible there that we will see something like 150 frames per second or maybe even 180 frames per second, but definitely not in 4K. But even in 1080, that still generates a lot of heat and an awful lot of data. And this is, of course, assuming that it's detailed. Now, what I've noticed with the R5, the camera that I'm shooting with right now, is when I shoot in 4K 120, it is buttery smooth, but the footage is a little bit soft. But again, I shot some images of pouring Coke into a glass filled with ice, and what it captured really, really well is the bubbling up and I'm not going to call them sparks, but when the carbon dioxide exploded and left the top, you could see sparkles and whatnot, and it captured that really well. So I have no doubt that Nikon is going to produce really good video on this camera to support all these video modes, as well as 30 frames per second and that huge data burst, which is going to be around 1 gigabit. It's going to have a really fast processor. And I know it's going to be an all-new processor, but it does have to be fast. And with a fast processor, that also helps reduce rolling shutter. And I do believe that this Z9 is going to have much reduced rolling shutter. So a lot of what I just said there was in either Nikon's development announcement or the rumors that preceded it by a few weeks. What is new, though, is the sensor size. This is going to have, the Z9, the Nikon Z9 is going to have a 45 megapixel full frame stacked sensor. Previous rumors said it would be somewhere between 45 or 50 and might push to 60. I said I didn't think 60 makes sense, and I certainly thought 45 makes sense. 45 is the same megapixel rate used by the Canon R5, so you're not going to get any oversampled 8K. The Sony Alpha 1 flagship mirrorless camera does 8.6K oversampled 8K because it has a 50 megapixel sensor. Either way, I think 45 is really, really good. And if they're going to give us the option of all eye or even raw 8K video on the Nikon Z6, I think you're going to be very, very happy with the detail. And I don't think you're going to get much better 8K video unless you go to a much higher price point. All right, let's take a look at some of the new specs. The Nikon Z9 will also be able to capture moving objects such as cars. I would imagine it could do motorbikes as well, because cars and motorbikes from a side profile are very similar. They've got two wheels and a body. The difference with the motorcycles, you have a person on there, but you don't see their eyes. They usually have a helmet, so I don't think it'd be too hard to tweak it to give you all motocross coverage with this camera, which would be terrific, especially at 30 frames per second. Now with that, of course, you're going to get human, animal detection. I assume it's going to have eye detection for animals and humans. But again, it hasn't been stated, but that's really what I would expect. And of course, the autofocus is good in low light. It's down to about -7 EV, so we've got that. It's also going to have dual CF Express cards. No surprise there, since the previous cameras, the DSLRs, the D5 and the D6, also had dual CF Express cards. And I'm really I don't know about this. So it's going to have 16-bit RAW, and I assume that's going to be on the photo side, because that would lead me to believe, well, are they going to do up to 16 stops of dynamic range with 4K video and do RAW? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. At a camera at this price point, getting RAW video is certainly plausible. In 8K and 4K, getting 16 stops of dynamic range is a bit of a push. I certainly think anywhere from 13 to 15 actual stops of dynamic range is expected. 16 stops to 20 stops is definitely right out, but I think it's going to do quite well. And it's also going to have a log footage, so if you want to get those extra dynamic range, you're going to have to shoot in log. Now, one really nice thing here is it has a silent shutter, but according to rumors, you will be able to adjust the sound that makes, and I really like this. Now, one other reviewer said, well, this is so silly, it's so silly that it's probably true, but it isn't when you really think about it. If you've ever shot at 20 frames per second or greater with a silent shutter, what you don't realize sometimes is that you're still holding down the shutter and taking hundreds of photos. That shutter sound, no matter how slight it is, gives you that haptic feedback, gives you the feedback whether it's haptic or whether it's audio, and you know you're still taking photos, because the last thing you want to do is get back home and you've got like 3,000 photos you've got to go through. And yes, I've done it. I've done it myself. So that is really, really cool. ISO range, 64 to 25,600. It's not a really huge range, but then again, you can't really compare these cameras to each other based on their ISO range, because there's a little bit of marketing in this. You can have cameras that can go up to an ISO of 2 million, but they're not going to perform any better really than a camera that can do up to 100,000 or 25,000 here. Although I would have expected 51,000 or 100,000 on this camera. Now, one really nice feature is that, let me read it here and say it properly, multi-leaf blade, and that's a protective shutter. So when you go ahead and take your lens off, it automatically brings a veil right over that sensor, protecting dust from getting in there. And this has plagued a lot of Sony owners. When they take it off, that sensor is exposed, so you get a rush of air coming in, stuff goes on your sensor, and people with Sonys are constantly cleaning their sensor. With my Canon R5, it has that same multi-leaf protective screen that comes down over the sensor when you remove the lens. I haven't cleaned my sensor yet, and I've thought about doing it, but I keep looking at my photos. I don't see any hint of dust. My videos look great, so I figure, well, why do work if I don't need to do work? What's the point of doing preventative maintenance if there's no sign that I need to do preventative maintenance? All right, it also has built-in GPS, which is really, really nice. I mean, come on, phones do it. Why can't they give it to us in cameras and not charge us $300+ for it? It's just ridiculous. Any camera today, I don't care what the price is, if it's over $1,000, it should have built-in GPS. All right, so let me just see what else have I missed out here. So yeah, 2 CF Express cards. Oh, it's going to have a twin-axis articulating screen. Now, is it going to give us an articulating screen similar to the Fuji X-T3, or is it going to be a fully articulating screen like we got with the Canon R5 or the R3? I'd much rather have the fully articulating screen. And I know what Nikon's aiming here. They want to make it so whether you're in portrait or landscape mode, your screen's going to be rotated exactly the way you want it, but you can still get to that using a fully articulating screen. That's kind of just my thing. Again, I'm a filmmaker, and this camera really is designed for stills photographers, fast action, sport shooters, but it's also going to have the video specs to say, look, if you're interested in doing really good video, you might want to use this camera as well. All right, so I've covered off that. I think that's pretty well. It's going to have a third joystick for portrait mode, according to the rumors. But what I like to do at the end of every video, we've talked about what it's supposed to have, and we know why this camera is coming out. This camera is coming out to replace the D6. It's to be a mirrorless version of their DSLR. It's showing that Nikon is fully committed to the mirrorless platform, and here's their flagship stills hybrid camera. And I think it's going to sell very, very well. And I think it's really needed. It's going to provide a lot of extra revenue to Nikon and help improve their results. And the latest figures that we had coming out from Nikkei, it showed that Nikon had dropped down to about 14% market share, which is really, really low. I think it was 13.7 or 13.9. They had lost 5 points over the last year's numbers. Really, really significant. Well, we still have a lot of people that are holdout on Nikon's F-mount, especially professionals. They don't see the cameras out there right now are really aimed at them. But this Z6, this is going to attract an awful lot of owners that have the D850, they have the D800. If you have a Nikon professional grade camera right now, or even the D6, you're going to want to watch this very closely. This could be your next camera. And the reason why you want to watch this closely, why you want to subscribe and wait for the latest news on this, is because when this camera does come out, and it's going to be announced within 2 months, and probably, I think the most optimal time for it to be released is sometime between middle September and the first week or 2 of October. Now, NAB 2020 this year is going to be right around October the 6th or the 7th, so it's the prime time to get released. And it's going to sell like hotcakes. Now, it's going to be a limited release. It's going to be just like the R5, and people were complaining about the R5 that they couldn't get the camera for up to a year after it was released, and even now you can still have trouble getting it. So you got all the people who are on the F mount, professionals, that want to move over to this camera, assuming all the specifications pan out the way they want. Some of them are most likely going to wait to hear some of the hands-on reviews. But we got a lot of people that are going to be moving over. Plus, you've also got people that have the Z6, the Z7, other Nikon cameras that say, you know what, I think I'm ready to move up to the full-frame professional mirrorless camera. So there's going to be enough demand from Nikon customers to generate a lot of sales. And it might just bring back others that have left other platforms, or those that are, there might not be many, but those that are looking at entering into the camera market. It seems every year that more and more people are leaving, and right now we have about, I think sales are down about 40% year over year from last year. Oh, sorry, 2020 sales are down year over year about 40% from 2019. COVID, chip shortage, not a big surprise. So I really think that there's going to be a huge demand for this camera. It's going to sell really, really well. So if you are interested, as soon as you have an option of pre-ordering, go ahead and pre-order. You can always back out at the last minute. There'll be plenty of people to take your place. And if you're normally buying through B&H and Amazon, like I do, I have links down below for affiliate links, and whenever you buy anything through those links, I do get 2% back. But if you do have a local camera store, what you might want to do is call them up, say, look, I'm keenly interested. I'd like to be first in line to get this camera. What can we work out? And you'd be surprised. Those local camera stores would be happy to have your business, as I did with Patrick at Downtown Camera. So if you're in the Greater Toronto area or in Canada, they don't sell outside of Canada right now, give Patrick a call. And if you want the Nikon Z6 when it comes out, let him know, and he'll make sure you get it. He did wonders with the R5. I got it right away. And a friend of mine, the village mayor, when he was looking at getting the R5 at Christmas time, he called him up, and 2 days later he had the R5. And it was still in short supply in many places in the world this past Christmas. I'm kind of excited by this camera. I mean, this is Nikon's flagship camera, and it's a mirrorless one. The D6 came out just last year, just January, and it was a good solid camera. It had some really terrific features, but again, it was a DSLR, just like Canon's 1DX Mark III was a really good camera, but it was a DSLR. And Sony, they threw down the gauntlet in January when they released the Alpha 1, 30 frames per second, 50 megapixel sensor, stacked sensor. Produces incredible results. It's a truly incredible camera. And when you look at that and you compare it to the 1DX Mark III, the D6, they just seem kind of blah, or even the A7S III. But if you compare the Nikon Z6 to the Alpha 1 and the R5, even though it's $2,600 less, stands up quite well against those three, and would certainly stand on the podium, to borrow an expression from the Olympics. Now, the R5 doesn't have everything that these two flagship cameras have, but that's why there's a difference in price of $2,600. With that being said, we don't know where Canon's R1 is going to be, and Canon's R1 is going to be Canon's flagship stills hybrid mirrorless camera. The R3, when it comes out, probably, again, within a month or two, will act as the interim flagship camera for Canon, because it's going to have better capabilities than the 1DX Mark III in many areas. And when it comes to the R5, in stills, in high speed, it's going to have better capabilities, but not in video. So while it isn't aimed, as Craig says at Canon Rumors, to be Canon's flagship mirrorless camera, until the R1 comes out, consider it to be in an acting or interim position. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching The Ordinary Filmmaker. I just lost what I was going to say. I've changed my ending so many times recently that I'm kind of at a loss for words, and it's 84 degrees and absolutely humid here, so I'm starting to lose it. But again, thank you so much for watching. This Friday I am going to do a live stream, and one of the things I'm going to talk about at this live stream is what I have planned at a local park as a get-together. So if you guys want to meet, do a greet, have a discussion, talk, argue, throw an ice cream ball, whatever you want to do. I thought it'd be great to get together for a couple of hours, and we'll confirm that up on Friday. I'm going to look at the weather, and hopefully by then we don't have an uptick in the fourth wave here. It started in Toronto, so yay, that fun again. Anyhow, thanks again for watching. We'll see you again soon.